Here's what you missed this week on The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
Coming to you from these United States of America, here in the middle of the country, good old Iowa. I am Bo Bonner. You might know me from the Catholic Morning Show that you can hear every morning. Bud, where people know you?
I am laboring down at Mercy College of Health Sciences, downtown Des Moines, where I'm the Dean of Liberal Arts and Sciences these days.
And you're on Christmas break, so that's got to be nice.
Yeah, it's not a huge break for me because as Dean, we go through, like we talk to students who need some direction for next semester and everything, but it's all great work. And the week of Christmas, especially to the new year, will be more relaxing.
Absolutely wonderful. We want to say thank you to Imogene Ingredients for underwriting the show. Thank you for doing so. It's like Christmas every week, Bud, for us having such wonderful underwriters.
Yes, I love, the guys, the employees there at Imogene, thanks for underwriting the show, but great work. We should do, I think in 2026, there's probably a show about agriculture that's out there.
We should go see if we can make that, we can plant some seeds and harvest what comes about. That was bad. Okay, Bud.
What's not bad?
Yeah, what's not bad is that we're going to be speaking with Renee Roden, great friend of the show. She actually has a monthly segment that she comes on the Catholic Morning Show on Iowa Catholic Radio and talks about religion and technology. She's done a fantastic job this year. But we're going to do a sort of year in review because it turns out 2025, quite the momentous year in religion and technology.
Yeah, this one I'm really looking forward to. I think so much to talk about. I'm kind of worried that we just left this one episode, but you and I can return to the subject as well.
Of just the one? Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about it a lot, too, so I don't think it's a fact of we're overdoing it because it's such a pressing matter. So it's been very interesting to think about it the whole year. But you'll want to stick around. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. Thank you, Imogene Ingredients, for underwriting the show. We appreciate all that you guys do for us. Blessed to be able to be here on Iowa Catholic Radio. Today on the show, we have with us someone who's been doing great work for Iowa Catholic Radio, Renee Roden, who we've known, Bud and I, for many different times, many different ways, many different venues, but she has been through the whole year doing a religion and technology segment for us on the Catholic Morning Show. And so we thought it very appropriate to think about this whole momentous year in religion and tech. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Renee, thank you for coming on The Uncommon Good.
So great to be here. Thanks, Bo. Thanks, Bud.
So, Renee, real quick, just for folks who might not realize this, you've been doing journalism for a while now. And so, if you don't mind giving us a bit of, background about what all you've done and how you arrived here, but particularly maybe the fact that as a journalist, the idea about how religion and technology intersect so much becomes something very obvious precisely because of the line of work that you do.
Yeah, so I actually have my academic background is in theology. I did an undergraduate and a graduate degree in theology at Notre Dame. And then I kind of found my way to journalism through, a longer series of discernments. I studied at Columbia Journalism School during the pandemic. And since then, I did a brief stint at Religion News Service and then have been doing freelance mostly since then. I've worked at Femme Catholic, when it was experimenting with a news startup back in 2021, 2022. And I currently serve as the co-editor for a newsletter of CatholicWorker.org, which covers the Catholic worker movement. But I have a lot of freedom as a freelancer to sort of follow stories and topics that interest me. And I always love seeing how religion intersects with different aspects of culture. And I really started honing in on religion and tech as sort of this mini beat when all three of us did the Catholic Communications Ecology Program, or the Church Communications Ecology Program, with the McGrath Center for Church Life. And just the conversations we had in our cohort, we discussed Marshall McLuhan, we studied Andy Warhol, Fred Rogers. I'm sure you guys have talked about this cohort in many different episodes on this podcast. But we really were, I think it was kind of a Kairos time. It was the spring of 2022. Later that year, ChatGPT was launched. And I feel like that kind of set off this whole wave of AI, the AI race, really, you could say, right? Artificial intelligence experts have been talking about AI for a long time, but that was really, I feel like ChatGPT was when AI developed this public interface, and it garnered so much more attention. I was recently talking with a friend from grad school, and we were saying it's so insane because artificial intelligence is pretty much all people in the journalism industry talk about right now. It's affecting jobs. It's affecting policies. There's so many aspects of it we can get into. But my friend and I asked him, I was like, did anyone in your journalism, in any of your journalism classes, did anyone say to you, your jobs might be taken by artificial intelligence? And he was like, no, we never talked about it. I don't remember talking about AI once in journalism school, which is kind of crazy to think about. That was just 5 years ago, and it wasn't something that really was on our radar. But now, it's definitely something that impacts, as I was saying kind of this morning, right? AI is not just like a figure on the landscape that we look at. It's impacting the whole ground. So definitely something that I and my journalism colleagues think about a lot every single day.
Absolutely. And, as you said, ever since we've met and befriended each other and been working on projects, this has been a sort of discussion that it's like snowballing. But as far as the sort of public debate and the Catholic Church really weighing in a very global way that even the secular media and just secular awareness itself points out, 2025 really ended up being momentous in a way that I think few of us could predict. And part of this, we said, of course, is because the Vatican put out a document, Antiqua et Nova, that really did try to start, looking at the idea of what is human intelligence uniquely. What does this mean when we talk about artificial intelligence? And then what are the ramifications, of which there are many? And so this starts to be a sort of a cornerstone into a year where the developments in the Catholic Church, Pope Francis passes away, we get Pope Leo XIV. Out of the gate, he's talking about things like artificial intelligence and a new industrial revolution, that it seems like month after month we had more and more to talk about. So, I mean, this became a very natural idea to say, okay, well, as we're wrapping up the year here on the Uncommon Good, getting in here to December, that you would be a natural person to talk about this. And I know that we sort of reflected on it, yes, on the Catholic Morning Show on Iowa Catholic Radio. But I felt like there's just so much that we can get into that we only really got on the surface. So let's start there at the beginning of 2025 when we got this document, because I think we can unpack so much from that then the rest of the year sort of bore out as being important. So when we talk about the ancient and the new, that's something that the church has long said. Ever ancient, ever new is sort of a tagline for so much theologically how we think. And so it was only natural that when we have this new entity, as it were, that hopefully we would have something to say about it. And I think you would agree, Renee, that we did have plenty to say about it. It's not exhaustive, but it really was, I don't want to say for once, but it is an example of a time that I really thought a document really set up the challenge and asked for the sort of conversation that subsequently then came about.
Yeah, I think, this was the first, this is a first in the sense that it's the first Vatican document on artificial intelligence specifically. It's not the first Vatican document talking about technology or, specific forms of technology that come up in general. It's not the first time that Pope Francis's Vatican, you could say, even though it's not quite accurate, but the first time Pope Francis talked about artificial intelligence. He had talked about it 7 months before at the meeting of the G7. So at an intergovernmental meeting, he decided to talk about artificial intelligence. And I think that it's pretty prescient, like you said, right? So, the church moved slowly, but the church really has been, I think, coming into the artificial intelligence conversation at a very, it's a very responsive pace, right? It's saying this conversation is moving so fast. It's so crazy to think about the ways in which our social response to artificial intelligence has transformed since ChatGPT was first introduced, the different ways that universities think about it now versus sort of that first frantic semester when people were coming up with sort of ChatGPT policies and, trying to get these softwares that, can identify AI being used in essays for plagiarism. So the conversation's moving really fast, but the church is certainly remaining a part of it and remaining responsive. And so I think Antiqua et Nova really, right, so it was really building on some of Francis's key concerns that he outlined in the address to the G7. And, the document just says, look, like, what is artificial intelligence? Like, can we even properly call it intelligence, which is a really great question for a theological entity like the magisterium to ask, right? We're in the business of talking about philosophy, intelligence, the human soul, the human mind. Is this even properly called intelligence? So it has a really great section that just asks that question. Like, this is sort of different ways the church has defined what intelligence is, what rationality is. Like, does AI even have this? And then it really turns to ethical questions, right? Like, how will it limit our human freedom? How will it impact our society? How does it impact our interpersonal relationships? It talks about healthcare. It talks about education. It talks about warfare, misinformation, which is a huge concern, deep fakes. There was a whole movie that came out this year called Mountainhead, which was about social breakdown happening because of AI deep fakes. And they also do address labor, right? The human AI and the AI impacting the labor market, which, I cited the Pew Research survey from earlier this year. That's one of the main concerns people have about artificial intelligence, is that it's going to take away, human jobs, which is certainly something that we're seeing in terms of journalists who are really concerned about AI taking these jobs. So I feel like Antiqua et Nova really laid out these concerns that I see reflected in the entire sort of global conversation about AI. There's been so much reporting on data centers and the amount of energy AI takes because, one, there's concerns about water pollution, right? That's something that one of my friends at the Chicago Tribune has reported on. But secondly, this is much closer to home, is that, water pollution is close to home, but in a very tangible, immediate way, people are seeing that their energy prices are going up because of the demands on the grid, because of AI data centers. So there's ways in which, these are sort of broad concerns that the Vatican lays out in this beginning of the year document that I think people have seen, affects them personally over the course of just a year.
Renee, as I read that document, it struck me as almost kind of a SWOT analysis. So the genre, the kind of the authorial voice that emerged was kind of like, here are some threats from AI, but there's also these opportunities. And you mentioned your experience in journalism. In education, I have to be honest, I mostly have a negative view of AI. And I don't think it flows completely out of a Luddite position. It's just how I see students and instructors leaning on it in certain ways. Do you think the Antiqua et Nova struck the right chord? Was it helpful to kind of do that sort of well, here's the threats that we see, but there's also some opportunities. And what does the opportunity look like? Is it sort of like a creative harnessing that we aren't ready for? Is it kind of like an appropriate asceticism when it comes to certain kinds of using AI? How do you think about all that?
Yeah, I think I would say, right, Antiqua et Nova rightly lays out the challenges, right? It rightly says, there's a lot of pitfalls here, and we should address them. I think I'll get to sort of the positives, but I'm going to spend, this document, I'm going to spend a little more time on why it's important to highlight all those concerns and why that wouldn't be being overly negative. I think, as I said this morning in my conversation with Bo, is that one of the interesting things that a Pew Research poll found earlier this year from April, they examined the different ways that the public perceives AI versus AI experts, which is really interesting because a lot of the people that journalists like myself reach out to, we're always looking for expert sources. So we're reaching out to a lot of AI experts. And it was interesting to see that poll and to say, oh, actually, those opinions from people who know the most about this thing may be way out of step with what the public is perceiving or what the public is concerned about, what sort of regular listeners are concerned about with AI. And the Pew Research poll found that the public is really concerned about, the majority of 57%, I think, of people that they spoke to were concerned about how AI is impacting human relationships. They were very worried about, careers, about jobs, about all of those things. So I think the church, in its sense, I think with Antiqua et Nova, it's very important that the church is speaking. I think it's very significant that the church is speaking pastorally here. It's speaking for probably, the majority of its flock who are not AI experts, who, as the Poll Research survey would indicate, the majority of American Catholics who would fall in this general public are also going to be concerned about AI or concerned about all these things. So I think it's really important that those concerns are highlighted, right? Because we're seeing that, the government is not interested in regulating artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence companies, 2 years ago, a lot of professors, AI experts wrote an open letter saying, hey, we need to slow this race down because there were concerns about its impact, artificial intelligence's impact on human society. And, there's been kind of all sorts of stats cited on, how sure AI experts are that this could lead to an extinction event or some sort of really deleterious effect on human society. But they were kind of asking innovators to slow down, and that's been abandoned. That's been left in the dust because there's a race to control this technology. It's very similar to to nuclear power.
That's
right?
what I was going to say.
Weapon.
Gee whiz, yeah. we think in lockstep. I was getting ready to bring up nuclear power.
Well, and I mean, a great this sort of parallel is perfectly captured in the most recent Mission Impossible that came out this summer, which is a perfect example of sort of public imagination, right? Pop culture at its finest. It's there's an evil AI that takes over nuclear arsenals. And you're okay, well, there's our deepest fear. There's our the sort of biggest negative outcome of this that we see in this race, right? And so I think it's very important that we, that the church as a global organization speaks out for these things because it seems like there are other pressures on people who should be putting the brakes on this, you could say, or should be asking these questions. There are clearly pressures they're responding to. That means they're not asking these questions.
Absolutely.
So I think it's really important that all the concerns listed in Antiqua et Nova, these haven't been resolved, right? These have only sort of these questions and these concerns about environment, about labor, about human relationship. These have just grown, I would say. You can read coverage from January till now, and you'll see these same questions being asked.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, the nuclear thing, so I think about that just me and the arguments that I try to have both in nuclear talks and then AI. On one hand, I want to argue for nuclear power, for instance, because I think it's a way to do something about the difficulties attendant to fossil fuels. We'll just leave it at that because that's a whole other show. But then what people will sometimes do is so if you think nuclear power has its role in helping with, dependence on fossil fuels, for instance, they'll be you're a fan of nuclear armaments. And I'm like, absolutely not. Right. And I think we look at the wild, wild west of when atomic energy starts and people are like, buy your elixir with radium. You're like, well, those are all massive problems that are now being sort of replicated in terms of artificial intelligence. I do think that there are things that artificial intelligence will be as big of a help of solution in very distinct, discrete fields that are something akin to nuclear power. But I think the Wild West version of it is as dangerous as just sending radium through the mail like people were doing in the 1950s. Just like I think nuclear weapons are the most probable thing that would have you can read multiple stories about how on the brink all human life was multiple times through the Cold War because of the nuclear arsenal. And I'm like, that's totally possible with not because I think we're going to get Terminators. I don't think that's actually how it works with AI, but I think with very thought through safety measures that the sort of compounding error exponential probability that AIs have is systemically dangerous. And so it's silly to me to start asking like, well, are you just going to be a Luddite about this? You're like, well, we can't be a Luddite about the nuclear arsenal. So we can't be a Luddite about artificial intelligence, but none of that means that we just give it a big thumbs up and an absolute pass. It actually demands that we get very much in the thick of talking about these very imminently powerful forces that we now have to deal with.
And I think the key here is always speed, right? And the key here is like, what does it take to do this well, right? And like, what is the discernment necessary to say, hey, like we could have nuclear clean energy, but this is a very different application of this technology than, sending radium through the mail. So it's like, so it's interesting because when I moved to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a year and a half ago, and right as we moved here, all these discussions have started about starting up 3 Mile Island again, right? 3 Mile Island, the site of the only U.S. nuclear accident. And it's been very interesting talking to local advocacy groups, talking to people here who remember the accident and who were affected by it. And one of the advocacy groups, which is called 3 Mile Island Watch, their tactic has been just going to the company that's bought the reactor, that's opening it, that's contracted with, I think it's Microsoft for their AI programs. I can't remember who exactly the company is. But basically, they've been going to this energy company and saying, these are all the steps you have to take to start up this reactor. You have to meet with all the schools around here. You have to make sure they have a evacuation plan. They have iodine pills. Like there are all these sorts of steps that we have to take as a community to make sure that this is opened in a safe way that has the common good at its heart, right? So how do we, and I think this is sort of the Catholic Church, this is the Catholic Church's stance on labor, I would say, or technology or anything, the 101 version or just like the top line version of it is simply, how do we have all of this innovation with the common good at its heart, right? That's great that we, can create a new energy source. This is great that like we could create this new form of technology that can do exciting new things. I think this is where we can bring in the positives of AI. My sister is a computer programmer. AI helps her code so much faster than she normally would. In terms of journalism, where definitely there's a lot more skepticism about it because journalism is a very tactile form of writing, right? You're supposed to go see someone, talk to them. You're supposed to see the facts. You're supposed to get people to testify about them. The way that journalism is constructed is really, it's a very old-fashioned means of testing the truth through forms of authorship, right? Saying, oh, well, this person told me this, and this person has this title, or they were this close to the situation. And so we can all weigh as a reading audience how much to trust them. But I'm, couching all my truth claims in terms of this person's authority, their authorship of this fact. And so AI is very problematic when it comes to that part of it. But it was a technology that reporters in Minneapolis used to kind of, they used it to decode and sort of analyze the writings of the shooter in the Annunciation school shooting this fall. Mm-hmm. So, that could have been a much more difficult project that they were able to do with the help of AI. So it's like, okay, this may be, there are select ways in which it can be applied for the good. There's been a lot of reporting on AI in healthcare, which Antiqua et Nova brings up as, one of the areas of concerns. And there's been a lot of testing with doctors saying, okay, like there are some ways in which AI diagnostic tools can catch things that a doctor might not, or they may help a doctor who's trying to examine all the possibilities or has a particularly different case. They help the doctor come to the right diagnosis more quickly. And I think with all these things, it's like, okay, it's a tool, right? It's not, or it's like, you would say the old sort of psychiatric standby is like, you can't have medication without therapy, right? It's like, right. Okay, this is a great tool, but we want, socially, we want the trust that someone else is putting their sort of life on the line for us, right? Absolutely. We want to know that our doctor is like, oh, I'm going to think about your diagnosis as much as I would my own or my mom's or my kids. So these are tools that help human authorship, not replace it.
And that's it, is like the scaffolding of having a multiplicity of approaches seems to be going by the wayside because of our sort of being enamored with the new and the speed of the new. This is The Uncommon Good. We're speaking with Renee Roden. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. Thank you, Imogene Ingredients, for making the show possible. We're speaking with Renee Roden, friend of the show. She's, of course, had a monthly segment on the Catholic Morning Show on Iowa Catholic Radio talking about religion and technology. So we're having a sort of year in review of a momentous year in religion and technology, 2025. Renee, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So one of the things we ended on the last segment was this idea that just because something is fast or just because something's new doesn't mean that that's the best. I mean, it's obviously not the only way to do information, as it were, but it doesn't mean it's always the best for any one particular aspect of information simply because it's quote unquote newest and fastest. And that comes with a lot of caveats too. But we were talking about with reporting that particularly this idea that what the news is all about is just a sheer like pushing of information from one place to the other so that what happens in point A can hit all points bulletin everywhere else, misses that one of the most beloved aspects of reporting is the human element of understanding how whatever is happening, the news, affects people on the ground. And I think that's one of the things you do brilliantly, Renee. It's one of the things that it's been so lovely to have you on the Catholic Morning Show reporting. So maybe do you have some examples of that where it's a human using human wisdom to be able to take a look on the ground and decide what's important? Doing the human element of reporting has allowed you to see people's human response to this technological sea change that the mere pushing of information from one point to the other would miss.
I think we could go to one of the things I wanted to touch on was just sort of like the response people are having on the ground. I mean, I've been trying to highlight different ways people are using AI or thinking about AI from the Pope, right? The Pope has spoken, Pope Leo has spoken a lot about it. So it's been fun to get to cover him in a way that I wouldn't usually think religion and tech would intersect. We spoke with Matthew Harvey Sanders, who we had met through a conference on religion and media. And he runs a company called Magisterium AI that has been cataloging and creating a database of the church documents, of church fathers, theologians, trying to make them accessible in every language in the world to make these texts accessible to theologians who can't travel to Rome. So there's some amazing things people are doing with AI. But like I was saying before, there is some skepticism about, there's a lot of skepticism about artificial intelligence among the general U.S. population. So it's been very interesting to talk to AI. I talk mostly to AI experts for our segment. That's just who has the sort of like interest in talking about it. But it's very interesting hearing from them kind of what they recommend to people, or how they offer people suggestions for how to kind of live a human life in the artificial intelligence age. So one researcher I spoke to, Catherine Moon, who's a teaching scholar at Villanova, she really had a very optimistic take on AI, I would say, or in the sense that she had a lot of, she really emphasized human agency in responding to it. There was a Wall Street Journal study, I think last month, that was about holiday shopping and all of these products people are seeing that have AI integration in them, which has become such a buzzword, right? This like corporate, like, doodad that they get to tack on, it has AI integration. And 58% of the respondents said it made no difference to them in their purchasing decisions. They weren't seeking this out. They didn't buy the sort of bauble that AI was being dangled in front of them. In 24%, so that's almost, a fourth, they said it made them less likely to buy it. So I do see that there is a skepticism. AI is sort of dangled as this like, this kind of like it's this like incredible sort of like thing that will solve all of our problems. And people are skeptical about it. And Catherine Moon at Villanova said, in her interview with me, she said, like, this is a really clear way we can push back on artificial intelligence. If you don't want to use it, if you don't want to see it as part of your life, like, don't buy it and don't engage with it. And, tell people who also agree with you, like, hey, we don't have to participate in this way of being. We can push back. We could write letters. She had, she was saying that the whole push towards AI is driven by a corporate desire for profit, right? And she's like, well, that speaks volumes. So if you as a consumer aren't interested in being sold this product or having artificial intelligence integrated into all of your children's toys, well, then definitely don't buy it. And also you can make that displeasure known. So I really appreciated that take, especially there was a couple books that came out that were very gloom and doomy this fall about the fate of the human race when it comes to artificial intelligence. So she just had a very strong sort of common sense idea of like, well, we have agency as human actors, and you can let people know through your purchasing decisions. Like, this is not something that appeals to me.
Yeah, Renee, Bo and I, earlier in the year, we riffed on this interview that Ross Douthat had with Peter Thiel. And
the interview.
Thiel is this fascinating figure. I use kind of a broad adjective because I don't know if I could say something real charitable, but, a tech billionaire who, oddly enough or interestingly enough, got interested in the thought of Renee Girard, the cultural theorist, anthropologist. And Thiel talks a lot about the Antichrist, but when he talks about the Antichrist, he's sort of like, he seizes on this idea of the Antichrist as a restrainer and kind of starts to move in the direction of like, well, the Antichrist will kind of try to stifle human ingenuity. But one thing that Bo and I sort of seized on was like, it's, your antenna go up when this tech billionaire frames the Antichrist in that way and then talks a lot about the Antichrist. Because at one point in the interview, Douthat asked him basically to the effect like, do you want the human species to persist? And Thiel had this long pause. So that's kind of a long runway for a question about like, do you think as Catholics and Christians, like, should we spend any mental energy on like what tech billionaires are scheming with these sorts of things? Or maybe a more constructive way to put it, is this sort of like, is this a manifestation of what Pope Francis warned about with like the technocratic paradigm and the way that we even sort of like think about the basic functions of technological development?
I remember that interview going viral because you shouldn't pause when someone asks, do you want the human species to continue?
Renee, do you want the human race to continue? Yes or no?
Right. It's disconcerting not to say yes instantly. Yeah. So I love what I remember my interviewee, Sofia Carrozza, said this earlier this year. And Pope Leo really echoed this same thought when he spoke with participants in the Builders AI Forum earlier this year. Right, this idea that like the tools make us as we make the tools. And so I think one thing Sophia highlighted in our interview, and I don't know if this made the segment, highlighting that, we have to look at what are the goals of the people who make these tools, right? What's their worldview? What's their idea of what it means to be human? What is their goal? Because what their goal is probably not in line with what our goal is for ourselves, right? Much less like a Christian vision of the world or this Christian idea of vocation or like what the human person's vocation is. And so I think it's important. On one hand, I think it's very important to know who the people are who make these tools, right? There is a Catholic idea that our work is an expression of ourselves, of our soul, right? It's part of who we are. We put the stamp of the maker on the work. And so I think it's very important to know who's making these tools and just to learn a little bit about what their goals are, because we might be able to then have a little bit of distance between ourselves and what they're asking us to do, their self and what their piece of technology is sort of, what desires it's prompting in us, what habits it's forming in us. Because I think it can ask us, oh, well, who is this for? Who am I serving when I pick this up? And, is this tech billionaire the person I really want to be serving, or whatever his interests that he's encoded in this machine? Are they what I want, or can I put this machine to my own, can I use this for my own purposes?
It's fun.
I think on the other...
Yeah, keep going.
Go ahead. No, please.
Okay, so I think what's funny about this is, like, putting all politics aside and which journalists go in which camp, one of the things that I thought Ross did that gets to your point about something that AI can never replace in journalism is actually the apocalyptic nature of journalism done well, meaning not the end of the world stuff, but to reveal something about someone. And whatever else we think about Ross and his opinions, and people can have all sorts of opinions on that, when he interviews people, sometimes the guy just asks the sort of offhanded question in a way that, like, I think prompts exactly Peter Thiel to give up more of what his cards are that he's willing to place on the table. And, Renee, I see this with your work. I see this with every journalist that I respect, that sure, we're always relying on journalists to give us, to say, like, can you tell me something about a situation that I've heard about, but I don't know more? Okay, fine. The exchange of ideas, the exchange of facts. But the best journalism, and why I think there's so many good Catholic journalists through history, is there's this idea that if you are human about it, there will be moments of revelation that the person themselves might not even recognize that they just did. And that is why I think that moment went viral, is everybody goes, Thiel said more by what he didn't say, and that an AI news service can never do that. And of course, I think that's what you're saying with these interviews that you've had on the morning show, is we've heard multiple people in your segments, and not like mud on their face like I think everybody thought Thiel did with his, but it's like you said, there are people who, if you talk in the right way, in a human way, it will be an apocalypse. It will be an unveiling, a revelation, a disclosure that is not just merely taking information down the channel like information theory says. I see this in the work because, of course, I've had the great fortune of, like, monthly hearing your segments on the morning show. Do you see that yourself in your work, that one of the things that a call that a Catholic journalist has to have is to be willing to do the hard work for those moments of revelation?
I think, yes, at its best. And I think also you have to be humble, right? That the revelation will not be perhaps as viral as that, right? Or sort of this, like, that's a very sort of cataclysmic apocalypse, right? Where, there's this sort of great veil being pulled back. But I think, right, you hope to have those insights that are deeply human, that will speak to someone, right? And I think, I think you have to be led by the story, but also, especially when I'm taking 30-minute interviews and whittling them down to 5 minutes to be half of a 10-minute segment, right? You have to let a lot of your own favorite insights perhaps go. But sometimes I am led by, like, well, what do I include? What is the most important thing for a listener to hear from this person? And often you are led by, like, oh, well, that moment was insightful to me. And if I can articulate why, like what I learned from that perhaps is going to resonate with someone else, right? Like, there was a moment of unveiling here for me. So I will, transmit that on, hoping that helps someone else, reveal something, yes, about this other person, about the world around them, but also, yeah, perhaps about themselves that they hadn't understood. And I think one insight for me I remember I was talking with Brian Greene a couple months ago, and there's a quote that was very beloved by Peter Moyes, the primacy of the spiritual. And they got this from Emmanuel Mounier, who was a personalist in, interwar France, developed this personalist philosophy of his own. And he talks a lot about how to be a personalist, which is sort of perhaps his answer to humanism, right? Like a different, similar, but slightly different philosophy, he said to be a personalist is to hold the primacy of spiritual values over the material. And not in a way, right, where that's like, oh, well, we can spiritualize all these problems and all these problems will be fixed if only we pray harder. No, like we take the world seriously. We take history seriously. We take human currents, movements, decisions, political decisions. We take all these things seriously as movers and shakers of history. But ultimately, a personalist, Mounier and Dorothy Day and Peter Morin would say, is one who knows that ultimately the spiritual is what's left, right? That God is the author of history and God is sort of moving through all these like mysterious currents of human activity. And that's something I remember talking to Brian about. And you don't hear a lot of artificial intelligence experts talk this way, which is why, I think Ross Douthat's interview with Peter Thiel sort of nudges towards this. But when you stop and think, well, like, okay, well, should the human race survive or not? Ultimately, I would think you would have to have, if you have a sense that there is a God and there is a spiritual world, you might have the instinct, oh, well, that's not for me to decide, or like, that's not my decision, but also like, I can hope and trust,
right.
That this race I'm a part of will endure, right? Or that like, I hope and trust in something greater than myself. And that to me has been a really powerful kind of refrain that has stuck out to me in reporting on artificial intelligence. I haven't written anything about it, but it's definitely been something I've been meditating on and want to write about.
Renee, when I talk to parents, especially parents of students, about new technologies, a lot of times they do tend to sort of fixate on the dangers. And so, for instance, with smartphones, like it's a big distraction, right? That being said, I've thought about this more with digital technologies, but I feel like they've opened up possibilities. So what I mean by that is like, it feels like the church has real gifts to offer in this context. If a major issue is distraction, then, the silence and the sort of like careful attention that we see in the liturgy is something that, young people might not be able to find in many other places. Do you see those sorts of things with AI as well, that it's opening up ways that the church can again proclaim the good news to the world?
I absolutely think that what the church offers will be of increasing importance and interest to young people through the third millennium, right? I think that, the phrase digital missionaries gets thrown around a lot in the Vatican, and there's a lot of different ways in which people interpret that, all for like, with the good deep in their hearts. But I do sometimes think that digital missionaries means that, there are a lot of digital natives who are very unhappy with the digital world, right? And I think this is something where, of course, like young children are interested in phones. They want to have a phone. Of course, there's a lure there, but I think it's very interesting to see digital natives value the real world more and want to get their hands dirty, want to be able to have manual labor, who have dumb phones and, meet up with their friends in person. I think there's a hunger for that. And I think that, the church as this like place of silence, as a place without a ton of digital distractions, as a place that's kind of like analog, I think that will increasingly appeal to young children. I think there's an interest. I haven't spoken to a lot of young people for these segments. But I think one of the concerns that Sophia Carrozza brought up was just what it means to be a human is a lot of passing down traditions that you can't explain with evolution, right? And so I think the counterpoint of that is that she might say our central nervous systems or our human persons hunger for that. We're wired for that connection and we're wired for that tradition, right? We want to know where we came from, who our parents are, what their world was like. And I think that interest in history, that need to have a history as a human person, grounds us in the real world, right? Like we can find out about our history online and that can be amazing. Pope Francis praises artificial intelligence for making this like whole, and Antiqua et Nova says like, right, AI has made this whole tradition of wisdom and insight of the human race available at our fingertips. We can look it up and learn from it. But learning from it is a human experience, right? Having that interperson connection, like you were saying, Bo, like to have a journalist interpret, to have a human person interpret all of this knowledge. And I think that is something that young people naturally want to have and will seek on their own.
You know, I got to teach Sophocles here this last semester. And so I think about perennial questions and what that means. And sometimes people mistake the figure for the ground. They mistake the content for the context, all of these things like this. And what I mean by this is it can seem like, oh, well, we keep reading Sophocles, like Oedipus Rex, Antigone, Oedipus at Colonus, because, people are nostalgic or they want to go back or they want to escape. But I thought that you hit the nail on the head talking about your interview with Sophia. Humans always want to know who they are. We are wired for this. And those plays are about, even in the face of fate, a human will say, even knowing that it might lead to total destruction, who am I? Where do I come from? And it can seem like technology is fate. That's what I think sometimes we got to realize, is it can seem like whatever is happening right now is fate. And what are we going to do? We have nothing we can do about it. But the human sort of, and this I think gets into the personalism you were talking about, the human spirit's refusal to just lay over and say, I'm okay with whatever's happening. I mean, this gets to the very heart of the cross, the resurrection, everything that we're talking about, is to say, I want to know who I am and where I come from and where I'm going. And even as something as powerful as artificial intelligence can seem fated, that I think is one of the things the Christian personalist human spirit is to say, I want to know where I'm from, where I'm going. And this new thing is not so powerful as to be able to snuff that out. Renee, we're getting here at the very end, maybe a minute left. I want to make sure if people want to find out more of your work, where are places they can go find what you're up to, other than they can go to iowacatholicradio.com, hit the podcast page, go to the Catholic Morning Show, look up your name, and they can find all your segments. But where else can they find what you're up to?
Yes, my website is reneedarleneroden.com. And they can read, if you go to catholicworker.org, you'll see a sign-up page for a newsletter that I put out weekly, me and my colleagues. So those are two main places you can find me online. Okay, and then wait, there's a book coming out, right? Or am I jumping the gun? Jumping the gun a little bit. But I'll definitely keep you posted when it's out. Okay, yeah. So like if you have, if you want to keep what's going on, you can go to Renee's website. Like I said, you can go to Iowa Catholic Radio on the Catholic Morning Show. Follow what she's doing. She has been giving us segments the entire year on the Catholic Morning Show about the intersection of religion and technology. It has been a wonderful year, and to be able to think about it with her on the show, it's been a great pleasure. Renee, thank you for coming on The Uncommon Good. You're welcome back anytime. Oh, thank you guys so much. Thanks, been a pleasure. Blessings. We appreciate it. Back with The Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr, joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. Thank you, Imogene Ingredients, for underwriting the show. Bud, we said it was going to be good, and not to toot our own horn. It was. Yeah, lovely. I'm kind of jealous that you get the chance to talk to Renee every month on the morning show. You know what's crazy? I mean, I did talk to her this last week, but she actually produces segments most of the time, so I don't get to talk with her. But I mean, they are so professionally well done. I feel like we're running around and surpassing NPR whenever we get to play one of her segments. Well, she was an amazing interview because like sometimes when you interview, you're looking for that right cadence, but she had this really there was never any awkward pauses or... The only one was when we brought up Peter Thiel, because it was an awkward pause itself. That was intentional. What's also intentional is that we invite you to join our prayer life here at Iowa Catholic Radio. You can wake up very early and pray the rosary at 4:30 a.m. It's repeated at 10 a.m. and then close your day at 8:30 p.m. with the rosary. 2:55 in the afternoon, we move to the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. But you can also use the Iowa Catholic Radio app to pray the rosary anytime, anywhere. And go to iowacatholicradio.com also to check out podcast episodes of Renee, for instance, when she's on the Catholic Morning Show, but all of our local programming, especially the Uncommon Good. You can also go to our business sponsor page, see what businesses sponsor the entire radio station, and make sure to tell them thank you for doing so. But also, you support us through your prayers, through your volunteer, but also
through your monetary gifts, especially here at the end of the year. So please prayerfully consider donating at iowacatholicradio.com. Hit the donate button to safely and securely do so. But as always, thank you. Happy Advent. Rolling into Christmas.
Yeah, happy Advent. And with the year ending, thinking about another calendar year of uncommon good. So we're very blessed.
This is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, family, city, state, nation, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good. And we'll be back next week.